This is our mission possible, to build Pathfinder Online, a fantasy sandbox, massively multiplayer online RPG. Goblinworks is formed by the three of us, myself, Lisa, who's the CEO of Paizo, and Mark Combs, who is our Chief Technology Officer. And Goblinworks is the company that we formed to make the game. It's not going to be produced directly by Paizo, but Paizo is going to be pretty intimately involved with Goblinworks. I'm going to give you guys a brief history of MMOs. It will be brief, I promise. So the first thing that we can look at and say this is kind of an MMO was called a MUD, which as an acronym it stands for Multi-User Dungeon. And the first MUDs were created in the late 1970s. The next game that we're going to talk about is a game that some of you may be familiar with. This particular game, Neverwinter Nights, was based on the old Goldbox engine that SSI had used to create, I don't know, a half dozen, maybe a dozen licensed D&D games. So they basically took that technology and figured out a way to make it multiplayer, multi-user. Okay, here's a game that is really seminal and also really obscure. The whole idea behind Meridian 59 was essentially every aspect that you will find in a modern MMO. It was just done way too early. This is kind of the inflection point. Ultima Online came out 1987, and it was the first really commercially successful MMO. Ultima Online, at its height, had about 250,000 paying players. The whole industry kind of took away from Ultima Online just a tremendous wealth of understanding of the kinds of things that can go on in MMOs. And in fact, they took away so much understanding from Ultima Online about what could go wrong in MMOs that they basically decided to stop making games like Ultima Online. EverQuest. It's not a sandbox, it's a theme park. And like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. But the most defining aspect of a theme park is that the primary mode of interaction is between the players and the environment. Instead of the player versus player content that had driven Ultima Online, EverQuest was driven by the idea that the players would find the bulk of their time in the game spent fighting monsters, kicking down doors, looting the monsters' bodies, and powering up. All right, then we have this weird detour. So a bunch of guys over in Iceland, they decided that they wanted to make a sandbox. So EVE is a science fiction MMO. At its heart is a very robust PvP system, and it is expected that you will engage in PvP on a regular basis. A bunch of guys show up at a place, there's a gigantic space battle, which is kind of static, and then at the end, the side that had the best firepower and the best tactics will be able to advance their territorial agenda. And over in the United States, Blizzard says, now we're going to show you how you really make an MMO. And they just blew the doors off. Warcraft and EverQuest are almost the same game. It's just that World of Warcraft took a lot of stuff that's in EverQuest and did it better. So they made better graphics. They made better quests, they made better backstory, they made better character development paths, they reduced a lot of the stuff in EverQuest that drove people crazy, like the fact that after you had a combat, you basically had to sit on the ground for 10 minutes while your health and stuff recovered. They essentially went through EverQuest and said, here's all the things that kind of work or don't work really well, we can fix that. I want to talk a little bit about theme parks and sandboxes. This is the two big divisions in the way MMOs are designed. So a theme park game is a game like EverQuest or World of Warcraft or all the clones. So theme park games have a primary focus on player versus environment experiences. The theme park part of a theme park game is the ride that you go on when you accept a quest and go into a dungeon. Also got a restriction on the persistence of user impact. It's very difficult in a theme park game to do much other than go kill monsters. The end game is almost always the raiding grind. And that started with EverQuest, and it was copied by World of Warcraft. And the community structures are very, very ad hoc. And of course, a lot of these games have followed EverQuest and World of Warcraft in having classes with levels, and the levels have level caps. So eventually, you basically take your character to the end of its progression, and then you sit there and wait until the designers add more content to the game so your character can continue to evolve again. Sandboxes are they primarily focus on maximizing meaningful human interaction. So in a sandbox game, the primary source of the content is what other people are doing, not what the computer is doing. You're going to see the effects of the player characters be persistent and visible. It's not sufficient that the player characters do something and are told that it was meaningful. You want them to do something and then be able to see that it was meaningful, so that people who weren't even involved in that activity know that it happened. The PCs can pursue a lot of different careers. They're not locked into just being people who adventure, or even people who adventure and sometimes craft. In a sandbox game, you can find a niche for all sorts of player behavior. You can be an explorer, or a diplomat, or a spy. You could be a soldier, not just a guy who fights. You could be an assassin. You could be really involved in the whole system of crafting, harvesting, moving stuff from place to place. You could be a merchant. Of course, there's no endgame. Typically in a sandbox, because the primary content is players interacting with other players, you never run out of content. And that's, to some degree, the reason that we have these amazing community structures in sandbox games. To support this whole idea, the PCs typically don't have classes. They instead have a skill-based system where you give the PCs a humongous amount of skills which enable them to pursue all these wildly divergent careers. This is what happened with all those games that were theme parks. This chart shows their total number of subscribers beginning the first month they were released and going forward. So the blue line, the long blue line, that's EverQuest. And it did really well for Sony. They made a ton of money for a long period of time. But after you leave EverQuest behind, you basically start to see the problem. These games have a huge spike and then a huge drop-off. So what's happening? What's happened is the MMO player community has become populated with people who are masters of theme park gaming. And they come to your game with all of the knowledge of all of the things that you are likely to have done, and they probably understand your game better than you do. And they chew through the content that you laboriously spent 3 to 5 years building in about 90 days. And a lot of times they just ignore the stuff that you thought was going to be really cool, like the text of the quests and the lore and the backstory. They just say, screw it, tell me which rats to kill and I will kill them. So they burn through all your content in a really short amount of time, they hit the level cap, and they go back to play World of Warcraft. The alternative is the sandbox graph. This is the subscription graph for EVE Online. Basically what this shows is that a sandbox game has this completely atypical subscriber trend, where you start really small, but you grow steadily over a long period of time, because there's no way to get to the end. And once a player becomes vested in this game, there's no off-ramp. There's no point where they get to and say, oh, I'm done now, I can quit, right? Okay, so let's talk about Pathfinder Online, now that we've gone through all this backstory. These are basically the 3 primary design objectives for the game, right? We want to maximize meaningful human interaction, we want to encourage character diversity, and we want to have power to the people. Encouraging character diversity, we're going to start with our character. Our little guy's going to go out and fight. And what's going to happen is that in our system, he's going to have skills that train in real time. So instead of going out and killing 10 rats and getting a little bit better every time he kills a rat, he's going to basically say, it's going to take me 6 weeks to become awesome at rat killing. And that character trains even when you are not logged on. Now, every once in a while, ding, we reach the end of a skill training session. Now, the skills are prerequisites for the ability to do cool things. So not only do you have to spend the time training skills, but then you have to actually go out and do something with those skills in order to gain new abilities. So our game is going to have a bunch of different social structures. The first social structure is a party. So classic tabletop gaming idea, you know, you and your buddies get together and you go and find a dungeon and you go kill the monsters and power up. And then at the end of that experience, you all go your separate ways. So the next step up is what we call a chartered company. So a chartered company is an evolution of the basic party. You and your buddies get together, you form a party, and you really like working together, and so you say, okay, let's make this a permanent gig. We're going to find a settlement or an NPC that will give us a charter. And once we have a charter, we basically become a persistent organization in the game world. The next step up on the evolution is the settlement. And the settlement is really kind of the core of the social concept for Pathfinder Online. And the settlement is a building that you create in a hex that you have cleared all opposing forces from. And then you advance that building in a certain way so that it becomes a home base, a territory that you control. And then, of course, once you've got the settlement, you've got access to all these people that are working on a coordinated basis, you can go tackle even tougher dungeons. You can go kill even harder monsters. You're going to have the ability to equip your guys better. They're going to have the ability to get higher levels of training and abilities. They're going to basically become, you know, like the next evolution of adventurers and able to interact with the game world. And then at the very far end, we have player nations. Player nations are when 2 or more settlements join together and they create a political alliance. They also control territory. They can control a much larger amount of territory than any given settlement can control. At the very highest level, they'll access and unlock the most powerful character abilities. And of course, once they do that, then the people who are members of those player nations, they'll be able to tackle the biggest and most dangerous dungeons. Outside of the game, one of the things we've done to kind of foster and promote this social community is this idea of the Goblin Squad. The Goblin Squad appeared for the first time in the Kickstarter that we just finished. The purpose of the Goblin Squad is to create an army of evangelists, to basically reach out to the most active members of our community and say, we recognize that you are doing something special for us, and we want to wrap you up in all the goblin love we can get. We're going to give you access to the ability to communicate directly with our developers. We're going to show you stuff about the game before it gets shown to anybody else. We want your feedback to help figure out how to make this thing as good as we can make it. Basically, we want you to turn around and tell all your friends how cool Pathfinder Online is. All right, just going to close here with a quick review of kind of where we have come from to set the stage for where we're going. In January of 2011 is when Lisa and I had our first conversations about doing Pathfinder Online, and we created this wiki, initial design, cleverly named. The wiki was kind of the center of our activities for a long time. In June, we took all of the stuff that was on the wiki, kind of filtered it through a sniff test to say if this is a good idea or a bad idea, distilled that all down into a big, thick written document, and then everybody who was involved in the project, all the folks at Paizo, myself, Lisa, we all looked at it and basically said, yep, this is the plan for the design. In November, we took the design doc, plus all the conversations we've been having about business models and the strategy we had for Goblinworks, and we rolled it into a formal business plan. And then we gave that to the Paizo folks, and they made it look awesome. March of 2012 is when the world changed for Kickstarter. Double Fine is a group of guys down in San Francisco who are ex-LucasArts employees, and they connected with Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding website, to do an adventure game in the style of the old LucasArts games. In 30 days, they raised $3.3 million. To raise a little bit of money, we needed to build a fairly small project, and we needed to show that we had real community investment and involvement in our project so that we could turn around and potentially go to outside funding sources and say, here's the proof, here's the thing we can show you, which proves that all these other things we're telling you about this product are true. But we launched our Kickstarter, and we initially asked for $50,000 for what we called a technology demo for Pathfinder Online. So we asked for $50,000. We achieved the $50,000 in 24 hours, and we ended our Kickstarter 30 days later at $307,000. The plan right now is to deliver the Pathfinder technology demo at the end of September, basically 90 days from the close of the Kickstarter. And coincident with completing the technology demo, that's when we'll be making our next announcements about how we're going to move forward and how we're going to kind of take this thing into full production. So basically from now until September, the next 90 days, my team is on target. We are working on this thing every day.